They dismissed her without a second glance, just an old black woman at the edge of the crowd. But when she stepped forward and exposed the deceased man's secret life, their world shattered. Nothing would ever be the same again. Want to know the shocking truth she revealed? Stay tuned. This story is about to get unbelievable. Before we get into it, let us know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button for more gripping stories just like this. The funeral was grand, just as they expected for Thomas Calloway, a man of stature and wealth. His polished casket gleamed under the afternoon sun, surrounded by an impressive display of flowers. People spoke in hushed tones, sharing stories of his generosity, his leadership, his unwavering kindness. To them, Thomas was a man to be admired, a pillar of the community. But at the edge of the crowd stood an elderly black woman, silent and alone. Her dress was plain, her hat modest. She held a single red rose, her eyes never leaving the casket. No one acknowledged her. No one asked who she was. She stood like a shadow, unnoticed and unimportant in their eyes. When the pastor finished his prayer, the crowd began to disperse, some lingering to share memories, others moving towards their cars. The woman moved forward, her steps measured and deliberate. Her presence was unassuming, yet something about her felt unmovable, unbreakable. She placed the rose on the casket, her fingers brushing the wood with a tenderness that seemed too personal. She stood there for a moment, her shoulders straight, her head bowed. Then she turned to face the crowd, her expression calm but resolute. "My name is Evelyn Turner," she said, her voice steady, carrying through the air. "I doubt many of you know me, but I knew Thomas better than anyone here." Heads turned, eyes widening with surprise. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Who is she? What does she mean by that?" Faces hardened with suspicion. How could this woman, this stranger, claim to know Thomas better than his own family, his closest friends? Evelyn's gaze was firm, her expression unwavering. "You all knew the man he became," she continued, her voice unwavering. "But you never knew who he was before. You never knew what he sacrificed." Her words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. The crowd fell silent, their curiosity piqued, their suspicions deepening. They had never heard of her. They had never heard Thomas speak of any Evelyn Turner. She stood before them, small and unassuming, but her presence demanded attention. "I'm here to tell you about the man you thought you knew," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Because his greatest sacrifices were the ones you never saw." The air grew colder, tension crackling as the mourners stared at her, waiting for her to explain. But Evelyn said nothing more. She simply turned and walked away, her steps slow and deliberate, her head held high. The crowd watched her go, whispers igniting once she was out of earshot. What did she mean by that? Did she know him before he was successful? Why didn't he ever mention her? No one had answers. All they had were questions and a growing unease that they didn't know Thomas Calloway as well as they thought. The whispers did not fade. They grew louder, echoing through the community. Who was Evelyn Turner? Why did she claim to know Thomas so intimately? Why did he never mention her? Days later, at a gathering at the community center, the conversation revolved around the mysterious woman from the funeral. People speculated, gossiped, invented stories to fill the gaps in their knowledge. But no one knew the truth. Maybe she was just some crazy old lady looking for attention, someone suggested. But the words sounded hollow, unconvincing. Evelyn hadn't looked crazy. She had looked calm, confident, unshakable. Maybe she was his maid or something, another guessed. But if she were just a maid, why hadn't anyone recognized her? Why would she claim to know him better than his own family? The questions were relentless, gnawing at them, unraveling their certainty. Thomas Calloway had been a man of respect, dignity, and generosity. But if that were true, why did he have a secret no one knew about? No one could answer that. No one wanted to. It was easier to remember the man they admired, the man who donated generously, who supported the church, who sponsored children's education. It was easier to preserve his legacy than to question it. But the questions didn't go away. They haunted them, day after day, until finally, someone found the courage to seek out the woman who had shattered their illusions. They found her at a small, modest house on the outskirts of town. The garden was overgrown. The paint was peeling, but the place was well kept, orderly, clean. It didn't fit the image of someone who had been close to a man of wealth and influence. Evelyn opened the door without surprise, her face calm, her eyes weary. She looked at the group standing on her doorstep, their faces tight with tension, their eyes filled with suspicion and curiosity. "We need to know who you are," one of them demanded, his voice firm. "We need to know how you knew Thomas." Evelyn's expression didn't change. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "Come in," she said simply, her voice steady. "It's time you knew the truth." They followed her into a small, neat living room. There were no expensive furnishings, no grand displays of wealth. But the room was filled with framed photographs, pictures of Thomas, younger and smiling, his arm around Evelyn's shoulders, his eyes bright with joy. Gasps filled the room as they looked at the photos, realization dawning. He had known her. He had known her well. But why had he never spoken of her? Why had he kept her a secret? Evelyn sat down, her shoulders straight, her face calm. She looked at them, her eyes unwavering. "You don't recognize me because he made sure you wouldn't," she said, her voice steady but tinged with pain. "He kept me hidden. He kept us all hidden, because he was afraid of what you would think." The room fell silent, tension thickening as they stared at her, waiting for her to continue. But Evelyn said nothing more. Her lips pressed together, her eyes far away. "Hidden?" someone echoed, their voice trembling. "Who did he keep hidden?" Evelyn looked up, her eyes hardening. The family he couldn't claim, the people he loved but could never acknowledge. Gasps echoed, faces went pale. They looked at the photos again, seeing them now for what they truly were, evidence of a life they never knew existed. A life Thomas had hidden, even from those closest to him. Evelyn's gaze was fierce, her voice firm. He did it because he was afraid. Afraid of what you would think. Afraid of losing the respect, the influence, the power he had built. She paused, her shoulders relaxing as she looked at the faces around her. He was a good man, but he was a coward too. He sacrificed his happiness for his legacy, and I helped him do it. They stared at her, stunned, shaken, shattered. They had come for answers, but they weren't prepared for the truth. They weren't prepared to learn that the man they honored was a man who lived a lie. But Evelyn wasn't done. There was more to tell, more secrets to reveal, and she was ready to let them see it all. The room fell into a stunned silence as Evelyn's words settled over them, the weight of her revelations pressing down like a heavy fog. Thomas Calloway, the man they revered, the man they thought they knew, had lived a life they never imagined. A life of love, fear, and sacrifice. Faces were pale, eyes wide with disbelief. They glanced at the photographs on the walls, seeing Thomas laughing, embracing Evelyn, his eyes bright and unguarded. He looked different in these pictures, free, joyful, human. Nothing like the man they had put on a pedestal. A woman's voice broke through the silence, her words trembling. "Why didn't he tell us? Why did he hide you?" Evelyn's gaze was steady, her voice unwavering. "He was afraid, not of his truth, but of your judgment. He was afraid you wouldn't accept us, that you wouldn't accept him if you knew who he truly was." Eyes fell to the floor, shame flickering across faces. They understood her meaning. They had loved him for his wealth, his power, his influence, but they would have judged him for his love. "He wanted to be your hero," Evelyn continued, her shoulders stiffening. "So he hid his truth. He hid his heart. He hid his son." Gasps filled the room, eyes widening with shock. "His son?" someone whispered, the question heavy with disbelief. Evelyn's face softened, her shoulders relaxing as she looked at the photographs. "His name is David, and Thomas loved him more than anything. But he could never claim him, not openly, not without losing everything he was afraid to lose." Eyes turned to the photos again, seeing David for the first time. A boy growing into a man, his resemblance to Thomas undeniable. They saw pictures of Thomas holding him, laughing with him, his love plain to see, yet they never knew. They never even suspected. "He was my father," a voice said from the doorway, low and steady. "He loved me, even when he couldn't say it, even when he couldn't show it." Heads whipped around, eyes widening as David Calloway stepped forward, his posture straight, his expression calm. He was the image of his father, tall, composed, dignified. The resemblance was startling, undeniable. "He visited me in secret," David continued, his voice unwavering. "Sent me letters he could never sign, paid for my education, watched me grow up from the shadows. He loved me the only way he could." Tears filled the eyes of mourners, guilt tightening their throats. They saw the truth now, the truth Thomas had hidden to protect his legacy, his influence, his respect. Not because he was ashamed of his son, but because he was afraid of losing them. He wanted to be perfect for you, Evelyn said, her voice softening. He wanted to be your hero. So he sacrificed his heart. He sacrificed his happiness. He sacrificed us. A man choked back a sob, his shoulders shaking as he looked at David. We never gave him a chance to tell us. We never gave him a chance to be himself. Evelyn's gaze was piercing, her voice calm but firm. You loved the man he pretended to be, but you never saw him for who he truly was. Faces fell, eyes dropping to the floor. They understood now. They were the reason he had hidden his love, his family, his truth. They were the reason he lived in fear. He was afraid you wouldn't accept us, David said, his voice cracking. He was afraid you'd judge him for loving us. And he was right. The words were blunt, cutting through the room like a knife. They flinched, faces paling with guilt. They knew he was right. They knew they would have judged Thomas for loving a woman like Evelyn, for having a child like David. They knew they had failed him. He hid his love because he was afraid of losing yours, Evelyn continued, her voice trembling. He hid his son because he was afraid of losing his place in your world. He sacrificed his happiness to protect his legacy, to protect your image of him. The truth was unbearable, suffocating. They had celebrated his public legacy while his private life crumbled under the weight of their expectations. They admired his power, his wealth, his influence, but they never saw his pain. They never saw his love. You honored his success, Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength. But you never honored his sacrifices. You never honored his heart. The room was heavy with grief, tears streaming down faces as they mourned not just the man they lost, but the man they never truly saw. The man who gave them everything while sacrificing himself. You didn't see him because you didn't want to, David said, his eyes shining with unshed tears. You loved his image, not his truth. You loved the man he pretended to be. The words were harsh, but they were true. They had loved Thomas for his wealth, his power, his influence. But they never saw his courage, his heart, his pain. But he loved you, Evelyn said, her voice softening. Even when he was afraid of you, even when he hid his truth to keep your respect, he loved you. Heads bowed, shoulders sagging, tears flowing freely. They understood now. They understood the weight he carried, the sacrifices he made, the love he gave in silence. They understood how much he had suffered to protect their respect. But he forgave you, Evelyn said, her eyes gentle, her voice forgiving. Because he loved you, because he wanted to be your hero, even if it meant hiding his own pain. They wept openly, their guilt and sorrow breaking through, shattering the silence. They had come to honor a hero, but they were leaving with the memory of a man who suffered in silence, who loved in the shadows, who sacrificed everything for their respect. But as the tears fell, as the truth settled in, they began to see him, not as a perfect hero, but as a flawed man who loved deeply, courageously, and selflessly. They looked at David, their faces softening, their eyes shining with gratitude and sorrow. We see you, someone whispered, their voice trembling. We see him. We see his love. David's shoulders relaxed, his face softening. That's all he wanted, to be seen, not as a hero, but as a man. Evelyn's eyes moved over the crowd, her gaze gentle. You can't change the past, but you can honor him by seeing him now, by seeing us. Heads nodded, tears still falling. They understood. They could finally see. They looked at Evelyn, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a stranger, but as the woman he loved, the woman he sacrificed to protect them, the woman he never stopped loving. They looked at David, their hearts breaking for the man who had grown up in the shadows, carrying his father's name in secret. And they knew that from this day forward, they would remember him, they would honor him, they would see him. They had come to honor Thomas Calloway as a hero, but they were leaving with the memory of a man who loved in silence, who sacrificed his happiness to protect his legacy, a man who hid his heart to keep their respect. David stood before them, his posture strong, his eyes unwavering. He looked at them not with anger, but with a calm understanding. They were just as trapped by Thomas's legacy as he had been. A man stepped forward, his face pale, his shoulders sagging. We never gave him a chance to be himself. We never gave you a chance to exist. His voice was rough, heavy with shame. David's face softened. He didn't want to lose you. He didn't want to lose your love. so he hid his truth to protect yours. The man's face crumpled, his hands trembling. We never saw him, not really. We only saw what we wanted to see. David nodded. But you see him now, and you see me. The man looked up, his eyes wet with tears. We see you, we see him, we see his love. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, faces softening as they looked at David, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a secret, not as a shadow, but as Thomas's son. His legacy, his love. Evelyn's gaze moved over the crowd, her expression both gentle and resolute. You can honor him now, not just for his success, but for his courage, for his love, for his truth. Heads nodded, eyes dropping with shame. They understood. They could finally see. They had loved his image, but they could honor his heart. We'll tell his story, a woman bowed, her voice firm. We'll tell the truth, the whole truth. Not just the man we wanted him to be, but the man he truly was. A man placed his hand on David's shoulder, his voice steady. You're part of his legacy. We won't hide you. We won't hide his love. David's eyes filled with tears, his shoulders easing. That's all he wanted, to be remembered, not as a hero, but as a man. Evelyn's face softened, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Then you will truly honor him. By seeing him. By seeing us. Faces lifted, tears still falling but filled with resolve. They understood what they needed to do. They needed to honor his truth, his courage, his love. We won't forget him, someone whispered. We won't forget you. David's shoulders relaxed, his face softening. That's all he wanted, for his love to be remembered. Evelyn took David's hand, her chin lifting, her eyes shining with pride. This is his legacy, not his wealth, not his power, but his love, his courage, his truth. They turned and walked out, their heads held high, their steps firm. They didn't look back. They didn't wait for approval. They didn't need it. They had told the truth. They had honored his love. They had freed his legacy from the shadows. The mourners watched them go, tears streaming down their faces, their hearts full. They stood in silence, united by grief, by love, by truth. They had celebrated a hero, but now they were ready to honor the man. And they would never forget him, or the woman who gave him back to them. The truth of Thomas Calloway's life lingered in the hearts of those who once only knew his image. His legacy was no longer defined by wealth or power, but by the love he gave in silence and the courage he showed in hiding. Through Evelyn's strength and David's quiet dignity, his story was freed from the shadows, revealing the man behind the myth. Those who once celebrated his success now honored his truth, vowing never to let his love be hidden again. In the end, Thomas was seen, not as a hero, but as a man whose greatest legacy was the courage to love even in fear. His story, once silenced, now echoed through generations, a testament to the power of truth, love, and acceptance. Let this story inspire you to see beyond appearances. If it touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that reveal the unseen legacies around us.